We're at a unique point in history for Riftbound. We're about to move past the very first era of Riftbound. If you're watching this sometime in the future, just for funsies, let me tell you where we're at right now. We had a TFT event in Macau that showed off 4 trial decks, Victor, Volibear, Yasuo, and Jinx, and 3 promo cards that would be a part of the Arcane promo set that weren't included in those trial decks. So those 3 additional cards were Warwick, Caitlyn, and Heimerdinger. On top of that, in early 2025, we got the reveal of Teemo. Recently, they've announced the name Riftbound, and they were recently talking about how they went dark and now they're back, so I assume there's going to be a lot more communication back and forth between Riot and the players now. Alongside that is going to be card reveals. Not counting runes or tokens, we only have 77 cards in Riftbound right now, and this is the last moment in Riftbound history where I can say that. So we're going to go through and rate all 77 of these cards. We're going to have 6 tiers: F, D, C, B, A, and S. S are the cards that are absolutely shaping the game right now. A are like really good cards, but not necessarily meta shaping. B are like fine, okay, good cards. Staples could even belong in B. C are like, they're getting worse, but they're definitely going to show up in decks. D are like pretty bad, like they probably should be like the first of your cards to go from your deck when you start optimizing deck lists. And F cards are cards that are more or less unplayable right now with the cards that we have. With that in mind, let's quickly get moving because this is going to take a while. One last point of caution, as I've said, we've only got 77 cards to work with, and the power level of every card in a card game always is a contextual evaluation. So any card I talk about in this video could get better or worse depending on the context of the rest of the cards. We have less than 33% of the cards right now because there's over 300 cards in the Origin set. Now, let's get moving. Cemetery Attendant is falling into F tier. I think it's just a little bit too slow to really get any meaningful amount of value in. The 1 recycle cost is really hurting this card. If they get rid of the 1 recycle cost, it would be substantially better. At 3 cost, you're barely just paying might worth the value. And then the card that you're getting back is like incentivizing you to play this later in the game. So it's kind of a deceptive 3 cost card in that you're not really ever playing this on curve. You're going to be playing this in the later stages of the game, which means you really need a lot of energy to work with to be able to play this card, because you probably don't want to just play this. You want to play this and the thing that you're bringing back, or you want to play this and something else that's going to be a tempo positive for you, and it's really, really hard to get that going. I think that recycle cost is really hurting it, because if you could choose to play it on curve in certain scenarios, I think it would be a lot more compelling. But the fact that you really can't play this on curve, because if you do play it on curve, you're going to be giving up a resource, I think it hurts just a little too much. Scrapyard Champion, getting the Legion effect on this is just absurd. The 2 discards isn't really worth it. Most of the discard payoffs that we have in the game right now are looking for like an instance of discarding, not for the quantity of cards you're discarding. So for example, like Purple Jinx, she re-readies every time you discard. There's not really much point in discarding a second card. So Scrapyard Champion's Legion effect is honestly more clunky than it needs to be. The 1 recycle cost hurts it way too much as well. Undercover Agent has similar problems going on. The discard thing we just talked about, it's probably better on Death Knell than it is on Legion. But at the end of the day, it has the exact same problems as Scrapyard Champion. Our first battlefield is Voidgate. There's just not enough support in the game right now to really justify this. It does kind of nicely work out that Super Mega Death Rocket can kill a Yasuo if that Yasuo is on Voidgate. But if that's working for you, it was probably because the Yasuo misplayed rather than you making a good play, and because the opponent can always play around Voidgate by making sure they don't leave their Yasuo on Voidgate, it does seem a little bit unnecessary, even in its best case scenario right now with the current card pool, though this type of effect is probably a strong enough effect that contextually this will get substantially stronger depending on what types of cards are revealed. One thing I wanted to add while I was editing this video about Voidgate is that I think it's going to be a really, really strong battlefield once there is support for it. Right now, a lot of the strong battlefields like Reaver's Row have this side consequence of being compatible for pretty much every deck. You put Reaver's Row in your deck, even if you're particularly synergistic with it, other people are going to have the ability to take advantage of it. But a card effect like Voidgate is a powerful enough effect that if your deck is taking advantage of it, it's going to feel really, really strong, because most decks won't be able to interact with Voidgate. So it should be just an EV positive thing for you rather than just your opponent, and it won't polarize you in other matchups. Obviously, it's going to be weird in like mirror matchups or whatever, but the average deck won't be able to take advantage of Voidgate, where some of the more powerful battlefields like Windswept Hillock or Reaver's Row, every deck can do something with those 2 battlefields. Now we can move on to D tier. There's only 4 F tier cards in my book. Moving on to D tier, we have Clockwork Keeper. I just don't think the 1 draw is worth running a 2 might card. Sure, the power cost is optional, so you could just play it as a 2 energy, 2 might card, but I don't think that is strong enough either. you're going to be behind curve on most people. Maybe it's good in like the Victor matchup because like at least you've got like a body to start fighting. But I think Yasuo decks, which is the only thing we can really run Clockwork Keeper in right now, they've probably got better things going on than Clockwork. Imposing Volibear is a super awkward card. It's obviously the most expensive card we have in the game right now. It's cost 12 energy and 2 power. That's an absurd cost for just 10 might, right? Like, I mean, 1 Yasuo plus a buff is enough to kill this thing, which is pretty embarrassing. I don't think that this is worth a deck slot. It's in your hand, it's too clunky. I don't like this card at all. I used to think maybe the best way to use this was to use it as your partner and then just kind of delay play it and just treat it as like a tech card that you always have access to and just kind of ignore your partner slot for the rest of the games. But I think the expected value of giving up your other Volibear as your partner in favor of putting this in there as your partner is just way too low to practically consider. And with that in mind, I don't think you ever put this in the main deck either because it breaks your hand so heavily. So yeah, unless there's more support for this in the base game, I don't think Imposing Volibear is very good. Stealthy Pursuer I've gone back and forth on a lot. I know a lot of people are really high on this card, but when you start to compare it to cards like On Guard or Discipline, the cost of Stealthy Pursuer is pretty embarrassing. My guess is that Stealthy Pursuer has more support in other areas of the game that we just haven't seen yet. But I think for Yasuo decks in particular, which is where I think most people are playing this card right now, she falls short of the other things that Yasuo can be doing. Noxus Hopeful is kind of an interesting card. I do think that this one will start seeing more play as we see more people explore with deck building stuff, especially when we get access to the larger card pool. Like, the way the game is played is probably going to dramatically change, because right now the way the game is played is almost entirely centered around beating Victor. Heimerdinger basically doesn't have any payoff in the game right now. He's best suited for Victor decks because you can use his ability twice in a single turn, essentially. I don't know if the payoff is worth it. Honestly, I haven't even tried Heimerdinger Victor. It doesn't seem worth it. I don't run any blue cards in my Victor deck because I don't think the blue cards are really worth the payoff of having to run blue. Instead, I just go like all in on the yellow cards. This effect on Heimerdinger has got to be crazy when we get access to the rest of the card pool, right? Like, this effect is just insane. So I assume there's some crazy nonsense we can do with this. Wraith of Echoes is fine. I just don't think it's worth running blue runes for in the Victor deck. And Victor's the only legend who has access to blue cards. So I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with this card. It's just like optimized deck lists probably aren't running it. Soaring Scout is like a fine card. Victor's happy to play this on turn 1. I will say every other turn after turn 1, this starts getting pretty awkward. There's some situations where you have access to 6 energy exactly, and you can do like Soaring Scout into, oh my god, what's his name? Cruel Patron. And that's kind of like a funny gimmick, but realistically speaking, this is probably like the first card we start cutting from Victor decks when we get access to more cards. And the last D tier card is the Grand Plaza. This is probably going to be a pretty controversial take, but I actually think that the Grand Plaza is substantially better than people give it credit for. Not to actually resolve this effect, but to use it as like a vanilla battlefield. A lot of people run Reaver's Row and Windswept Hillock in like every deck, and the idea is that they're just good battlefields for you in most cases. But the problem is they're making your matchup spreads worse. When you run Windswept Hillock or Reaver's Row or even something like Altar of Unity, other decks are usually going to be able to take advantage of this in a better way than you can. Like, if you're not a Yasuo player and you're running Reaver's Row, you're hurting your Yasuo matchup. But if you run something like the Grand Plaza, which neither player is reasonably going to resolve because it's a little undertuned contextually with the rest of the cards we have, you would rather have this Grand Plaza in play than something that Yasuo can take advantage of. Moving on to C tier, we've got Caitlyn, who's obviously undersupported right now. There's no real payoff for this. I will say the Yasuo leader ability, or I should say the legend ability, is pretty compatible with Caitlyn. The only problem is she has to like wait a turn in base so that she can ready up, and then once she does do this effect, she can't retreat, right? You can only push her once and then use this effect, and then she's just kind of stuck on the battlefield, so she's probably going to get removed. She has a power investment, right? She costs 1 calm power, so that's going to be a bit of a steep price. She becomes significantly more compelling if you are running Clockwork Keeper, because then you run the Seal, and now you're running Clockwork Keeper, Caitlyn, and the Seal, and they all kind of like work together in a cute way. So if you want to go that route, I think that is significantly more compelling than just putting Caitlyn raw into the deck. I am a big Caitlyn enjoyer from like a lore perspective. She's one of my favorite League of Legends characters, so I will be trying to make this card work when we have access to the rest of the card pool, but right now I think she's just a touch underwhelming. Seal of Calm is definitely the worst seal we have available to us right now. There's just not as much of a need for the seals in a Yasuo deck compared to the seals that you need available to you in, say, like Jinx or Victor. Possession is an incredibly steep cost, but very, very strong in the Volibear matchup. So it's kind of like a tech card in that sense. Like, if you're playing Yasuo or if you're even playing Jinx, having 1 or even 2 copies of this in your deck It can feel pretty bad when you draw it when you don't need it, but it's also a card that can swing games that were otherwise impossible for you to win. So is it worth putting a card in your deck that is going to substantially hurt your other matchups, but make it so that you can win in unwinnable positions? That's a question you have to ask yourself on the deck building screen. Well, not on the screen, you know, we're building physical decks here, but you know what I mean. Personally, I like running possession. It's just, but the deck building decisions I want to make to make my deck consistent enough that I can run possession, I feel like those are pretty limited right now with the existing card pool, and as we get more cards, I think you'll be able to structure your deck in a way that will make possession contextually make more sense, but only time will tell. I will say it feels pretty good in Jinx because you're already discarding cards in Jinx, so if you draw it in the situation where, oh, I can't really use possession here because XYZ reason, like I just don't have the resources for it, or you know, the board state doesn't really make sense for it, you can always use it for a discard proc to get back a Super Mega Death Rocket, or just a part of your on-curve discard junk that you use. So definitely consider it in your Jinx decks, especially because Volibear can be a pretty rough matchup once you get past a certain point in the game. Super Mega Death Rocket, I think, is the weakest of the signature spells. It's really sad that this card doesn't kill off a Yasuo and it doesn't kill off a Kayn. It's like a 4-cost investment, it costs a power, and sure, you can replay it a bunch of times, but realistically speaking, you're only playing this once per turn until, like, really late in the game, because the way Jinx wants to curve out right now, anyway, is to dump her hand as quickly as possible, spend all the power she needs to spend to make that happen, and start drawing for 2 cards a turn, so you're always playing 2 cards a turn for the maximum amount of tempo. If you get to the point where you're conquering to specifically discard to return this back to your hand, A, it's likely that you're going to skip a card draw or something just because of the way that the hand ends up playing out, or you're not going to have the resources to cast 2 Death Rockets in a single turn, and then also, you know, play out units or move your units in a way that's advantageous to you. If you start comparing this to some of the other removal that's in the game, or some of the other signature spells in the game, I think Super Mega Death Rocket really got the short end of the stick, especially because it got nerfed. It used to be a 3-mana card, and now it's a 4-mana card, so yeah, not looking good for Death Rocket in my humble opinion. Disintegrate's up next, and it's just a tad overcosted. I don't think it's worth the cost. Man, I feel bad about Disintegrate, because in theory, this should be like a fine spell. The main problem with it is both decks, Jinx and Volibear, don't really want to play this. Jinx doesn't want to play it because it's too expensive, and Volibear doesn't want to play it because if they're at 4 energy, there's just so many things that they would rather be doing. I will say an on-curve Disintegrate as a Volibear doesn't feel too bad. Like, playing it on turn 2, it would be, to kill off something the opponent played on turn 1, and then on your turn 3, playing out like a Storm, well, you wouldn't have the mana for Stormclaw or Ursine, but like, I don't know, a Blazing Scorcher or something. Like, that curve feels pretty okay, but basically every turn after turn 2, Disintegrate is really awkward to play, because you want to play things like Stormclaw Ursines, you want to play things like Scorchers, you want to play things like Misfortune, and you just don't have the time to be using Disintegrate. You would rather sacrifice the tempo loss of not killing off the opponent's thing just to put one of your own things on the board. I will say it's a little bit better in the Victor matchup because, like, it's a way to play around Cull, but it's not really a way to play around Cull, because if you waste a turn disintegrating and then the next turn you develop a unit, they're just going to call you the following turn, and they did that with 2 energy, and then they developed more things, and here you are with nothing on the board. Kadrigan's cool. I've seen situations where people have played Kadrigan and it's been, like, pretty impactful, so there's definitely scenarios where it's like, oh, this felt good. Definitely more so than anything else in this tier, with the exception of course, Possession, because obviously Possession can just be game-winning in certain states. And Kadrigan kind of feels like that, where in a lot of cases she's kind of just a dead card, but in the scenarios where she's good, she feels really good. It feels like a bit more Win Mori to me. Like, if you have the tempo to be playing out a 9 energy, 2 power card that's only 9 might, you're probably in, like, a super good spot already. Machine Evangel feels like a really good contingency plan. Once you go all in on a certain battlefield as Victor, you can just kind of throw a Machine Evangel there, and it's like, okay, if you do manage to overtake me here with like a Stormbringer or some other crazy combo, at least I get 3 recruits. And then once I have those 3 recruits, now you're scared that I have a grand stratagem follow-up. So it's a good contingency plan. It feels pretty solid, but it can feel clunky in certain scenarios. Unchecked power, I think, is just a bit too slow. Exhausting all of your units, no follow-up makes sense, because this would be extremely strong if it didn't do that. But I think giving up a turn in a 1v1 environment is a bit too much to give up. I think this card will potentially be really strong in 2v2 because of the way that the turns are structured. But outside of that, I don't really see this being a really strong card. And while I'm here, I guess I'll mention that in free-for-all games, if you cast Unchecked Power, in most cases you're donating the game to somebody else at the table. rather than doing something proactive for yourself, because you're casting unchecked power, maybe you throw everybody else off the board or something, but there's a whole turn rotation before it gets back to you, and in most cases, someone's winning the game by then. Targon's Peak is a really powerful battlefield for both Yasuo and Victor. It's really weak outside of those two decks, and I will say in the mirror match, it feels pretty negligible for both sides. It's not necessarily that this is like a bad battlefield. I mean, we've already talked about the Grand Praza, and I think that that's a good one, and that was in the previous tier. By virtue of the positioning of this battlefield on this tier list, I think it's pretty good, but we've got some really powerful battlefields to go over here. So I will say Targon's only going to get better and better with the rest of the card reveals, because more and more characters will be able to use it. Moving on to B tier, starting with Windwall. It's a really strong counterspell. Basically, no matter what the cost of this card was ever going to be, just the first thing in the game that reads counter a spell, no other context or conditions required, was going to be strong. And there you go, Windwall is strong. Mobilize, I mean, it's ramp. Ramp is good. I will say of all the ramp options that Volibear has available to him, this is probably on the weaker end. This will probably be good in other orange decks, or better in other orange decks than it is in Volibear. I think Volibear is generally happy to skip the first turn and then follow up on turn 2 with a Catalyst of Aeons or a Buccaneer. Don't get me wrong, it feels nice when you hit it. I just don't know if it's going to be worth the deck slot once we get access to more cards. I do think decks other than Volley will really appreciate this card, because the main reason it's less compelling in, say, something like Volibear is because the Legend ability gives them access to ramp already. So I don't know if this is going to end up being worth one of your 40 cards, or 2 of your 40 cards, or 3 of your 40 cards, because it does get really awkward after turn 1. Stormclaw Ursine, I've gone back and forth on whether I thought this card was good or not. The conclusion I'm at right now is that it is good, and you want to run 3 of it. This card feels really, really nice. 7 is an awkward slot. Basically, everything above 6 is really awkward because you can't play it and Stormbringer on the same turn. We'll talk about Stormbringer later, but a card's compatibility with Stormbringer is like a huge consideration when evaluating a card for Volibear decks. But at the end of the day, the ramping is just too much from this. You can't not run this. And that's why it's in B tier. It's really, really good. Carnivorous Snapvine, even post-nerf, is really strong. I think it is like a little overcosted where it's at right now, with its current effect only being able to target battlefields. I think this could go down to like 5 energy, 1 power, but 5 energy, 2 power is still definitely possible. Looking at this retrospectively, I won't bother doing it, but this probably should have gone in the previous tier. Now that it can only target battlefields, it's pretty easy to play around. So this will feel really strong in kind of casual games or like new player games, but I think at higher and higher levels, Carnivorous Snapvine is going to feel a lot worse since his change. Misfortune Buccaneer is a really solid card for closing out the game. It's kind of like she always has acceleration. Like if you think of her as a 3 mana, 4 might card, which would be really good, or 3 energy, sorry, 4 might card, which would be really good. You can spend an additional energy plus a power to make her go to an unoccupied battlefield. Obviously, she's not actually an acceleration card, and you do always have to pay that cost, so it is like a little worse. I don't think you run this in Yasuo lists. I think it's a bit too clunky for Yasuo, especially because it has to do the recycle. However, in Jinx decks, this can feel really important for closing out games. You just need a lot of cards in your deck that have like acceleration or like pseudo acceleration to be able to touch multiple battlefields in a single turn with only 2 card draws. As strong as the Victor deck feels right now, the Victor Champion is not the reason for it. The card is pretty awkward. Obviously, it doesn't proc off of recruits, which would be absolutely silly, but there's a lot of board states when you're playing Victor where your entire board is just recruits. So playing out Victor is pretty underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, when he's out there and he's doing his thing, it feels good, but he's easy to remove and the payoff isn't that crazy, especially now when contextually you can kind of think of as a recruit as like a 1 energy thing, because the leader ability or the legend ability summons the card for 1 energy. So this Victor does feel a little bit expensive compared to that. I think it'll be the case no matter what blue Victor ends up looking like. Blue Victor is going to be the partner. You probably still main deck Victor, but I don't think he needs to be your partner slot. There's not enough compatible situations where I'm like, oh yes, I'm very glad that Victor is in my partner slot. Like, I'm basically never playing this card on curve. There's not usually a reason to do it outside of like really niche turn 1s and 2s. Don't get me wrong, it's like a good card, but it's a reason it's in B tier and not ARS. Faithful Manufacturer is just a really, really solid card. The Victor player wants more bodies. This is 2 bodies for 3 energy. We're happy with that. Cruel Patron is a 4/6. Hard to complain about that. You have to sacrifice a body for it. I will say, I think this card's gonna get even better with the rest of the card pool. I don't think that this card was designed for Victor. I think it just happens to be the case that it works well in Victor, so I'm curious to see contextually what the rest of the game looks like. and see what cards synergize with Cruel Patron and where he really fits into the game. Rebuke is a really solid removal tool, great way of closing out games. Kayn is still criminally underrated. Everyone recognizes the power level of Yasuo. Yasuo is really, really strong. I don't think Kayn is too far behind him. The only reason why people favor Yasuo over Kayn right now is because, if I'm being honest, I think Yasuo is a little overtuned, guys. It doesn't take much to get Kayn going. As long as there's an open battlefield out there, he can do some crazy stuff with the Yasuo Legend ability. Moving him twice in a single turn is not difficult, and even in scenarios where he's not able to win the battlefield that he's moving to second, at the very least, he should be able to kill off a bunch of stuff. Maybe you can even follow up with a Last Breath and do some crazy stuff from there. I just think the card's fantastic. Madden Marauder continues to impress me. I've super doubted this card when I first saw it. I'm like, I don't know if this is worth it. But one thing I always forget to consider when evaluating this card is that, A, it's got tank, right? Tank is a good keyword. We don't really feel the power of tank right now when we play Riftbound, but that's just because there's not very many cards with tank. So I think people don't really think about it too much. But Madden Marauder's tank keyword is a big deal. Obviously, you can target both enemy and ally abilities, so you can do some cool stuff like that. I think this belongs in both the Jinx decks and Yasuo decks right now. I don't think that'll be the case when we get access to the full card pool. Curious where he'll land there. Probably in Misfortune decks if the rest of the Misfortune cards are anything to be going off of. Teemo's really solid. I think he belongs in Jinx decks at the very least. He probably belongs in Yasuo decks. I haven't played too much with Teemo Yasuo, but the idea is there. Like, the fact that you, on turn 2, can push a 4-might card just seems really good. Seal of Discord, similar things that we've talked about with other seals. The only difference between all of the seals on this tier list is just contextually whether they make sense or not in their color. Purple is like a reasonable seal to be running because it works well with Jinx, it works well with Kayn, it works well with the it works well with like Rebuke and Possession. There are some like really good high value cards that want you to be using purple power, and Seal of Discord gives you access to that. So in conclusion, Seal of Discord belongs a little higher up than, say, the Seal of Calm, which was the last seal we went over. To be honest, Volibear's really only here because he's the only partner that makes sense for the Legend Volibear, so you get to see him a little bit more than the other Volibear, and you get to see him a bit more than you would if he wasn't the partner. Truth be told, if you could run any other partner, you probably wouldn't run this Volibear. He doesn't feel especially strong in the deck, but just by virtue of the fact that we have to run a partner, and this is the best one to run, he definitely gets bumped up a little bit. I go back and forth on how strong I think Tryndamere is. I think B tier is like a good spot for him because the card does feel pretty impactful when you get it to go off, and the fact that he can cheat the 8th point is kind of a big deal as well. He is a bit awkward to play in the game right now, right? He's too expensive for Jinx, and he's sacrificing too much energy for, sacrificing too much power, I should say. Too many runes, I should say, for Volibear. Volibear can't get away with running the seals. Tryndamere is giving up too much. So realistically, you're only playing Tryndamere when you're already at 12 energy, or you're playing him as kind of like a Hail Mary, and I don't think in either of those two situations you're very happy. Honestly, I wish I placed this guy a tier lower than I actually did here. Probably belongs on like a similar comparable level of like Possession, because it's the same idea where it's like he can win a game just on his own more or less, but most of the time he's going to feel a little bit awkward. Blazing Scorcher, I've gone back and forth on as well. I think that it's probably good. I don't think it'll make the cut in like optimized deck lists, but it probably makes sense to be running right now in, at the very least in Volibear maybe. Man, I don't know, the Volibear list is pretty tight, but just like a 5 mana, 5 might thing that procs the Volibear effect is probably good enough. Legion Rearguard is just like a fine unit. There's nothing really crazy to talk about here. It's acceleration for Jinx, so she can touch battlefields, which is nice. Similar thing can be said for the Blazing Scorcher as well, by the way. You're probably happy to run it in Jinx, depending on what your curve looks like. Watchful Sentry is just like a fine unit. It's good for Victor boards. They get to draw cards. They can throw it on battlefields just as like random support. If cheap units are good for Victor, drawing cards is good for Victor. It's just like a fine card to run in the Victor deck. Obelisk of Power is absolutely crazy for Volibear lists. I actually think you're supposed to run this in Jinx as well, so that you can guaranteed cost the Demolitionist Jinx on turn 1. But I know most of us aren't ready for that conversation, so let's just talk about this through the lens of Volibear. Very, very strong effect for the Volibear list. It changes a lot of math. If you're going first, it lets you play a 5-cost card on turn 2. If you're going second, it lets you play a 4-cost card on turn 1, which is huge because getting access to, say, something like a Buccaneer on turn 1 is a huge deal, right? That's a 5-might card, and it's also drawing you an additional rune. So going into your turn 2, you'll have access to 7, which means you'll be able to Stormclaw Ursine. Like, the Obelisk just breaks so much of the math, and it gets really degenerate really quickly. So running Obelisk is, I feel like, a no-brainer for the Volibear lists. Zorn Warrens is just kind of like auto-include for Jinx lists. It's really, really strong effect for Jinx lists. It lets you do lots of re-readying stuff with the purple Jinx. And lastly, we have the first legend of the video, Jinx. Her effect is really, really strong. It's just contextually with the rest of the cards in the game right now. She definitely feels like the worst of the 3 legends. Oh, sorry, the worst of the 4 legends. Moving on to A tier, we have Meditation, a reaction. A draw 1 to 2 cards on 2 energy is pretty good. Like, this card feels much better to me than Clockwork Keeper. Obviously, you don't have to run one over the other, but obviously the cards fulfill a similar purpose, so. Discipline's a really strong combat trick, plus it draws a card. On Guard is also a really strong combat trick. Defy is a really, really powerful counterspell, especially if you already have a seal up. Another argument to be running the seals in Yasuo decks, I guess. Wielder of Water is the best statted unit at 3 energy, assuming that you're getting access to the full 4 might. As a result, he feels really powerful and really annoying to get over the top of in the early stages of the game. Catalyst of Aeons has access to 2 additional energy. It's hard to complain about that. Deadbloom Predator is an extremely strong card to be playing basically at any stage of the game where you're able to. Being able to swing a battlefield immediately from hand, this is pretty much the only way that Volibear can do this from hand as well, which feels really nice with a single card. Obviously, he's got like Stormbringer combos and whatever, but with a single card being able to touch a battlefield from hand, this is pretty much the only way that Volibear is doing it, at least reasonably at this stage in the game, so it's a big piece of utility that the deck really can't do without. Gust is a really strong removal tool, even after its balance changed to only being able to affect cards at battlefields. Jinx Rebel is a huge payoff card for the discard engine, though I will say when compared to cards like Yasuo, it's substantially weaker. Traveling Merchant is just like an average statted card that with an upside of being able to discard and draw 1. The discard 1 is like a huge deal for the Jinx deck, so we take it for the Rebel re-readying and stuff like that. It's just like fine. Seal of Fury is definitely the second best seal. It's just got a lot of good targets, right? The Jinx deck wants it because they want to be able to do acceleration effects, but really just because of the positive interactions with acceleration and cards like Vi, running the seal in a Jinx deck is more or less a no-brainer. Magma Worm is an extremely strong payoff card. In the Victor matchup, it's pretty awkward because in most matchups, you're happy to just play Magma Worm to base and just be like, okay, that's my Magma Worm in base, and then I'm going to do something crazy next turn. But against Victor, they're probably going to do some crazy stuff like Hidden Blade, something you've got on a battlefield, and then cull your Magma Worm or something along those lines. So those are things you have to keep an eye out for and consider as you play a Magma Worm. Make sure you've got other stuff on the board that can be sacrificed for cull. But yeah, your units emptying ready is just like, I mean, it's just a crazy effect. I don't know what else to say. Brazen Buccaneer is probably one of my favorite cards in the game. This is not a Jinx card. You run this in Volibear. You can play this on turn 2 to start ramping with Volibear, or like I was talking about earlier with Obelisk, if you're going second, you can even play Brazen Buccaneer on turn 1, which is absolutely nuts. He breaks a lot of really important math for Volibear. If you are at exactly 4 and you play Brazen Buccaneer, you'll be able to ramp into Stormclaw Ursine the following turn. Plus, it's a good combo with Stormbringer, because at 10 energy, you can discard 1, play the Brazen Buccaneer for 4, and then Stormbringer a battlefield for a whole 5 damage to everybody that's there. It's almost certainly going to be a board clear. Maybe Brazen ends up having to trade, but at the very least, you clear the board. And if you're later on in the game, you don't want to give up the discard, you can always just play it as a 6 energy card instead of doing the discard and use the 6 energy Stormbringer and still do the crazy combo. I love this card. I think Demolitionist Jinx is the best Jinx partner for the Jinx Legend. She's a really good, consistent way of getting cards out of your hand, which is exactly what the Jinx Legend wants to be doing. In addition to that, she's also an accelerated card that can push for a whole 6 power, or a whole 6 might, I should say, which is just really good tempo. I do wish it went to 7, so it would go over the top of Yasuo, but that's more about Yasuo being good than Jinx being bad. Chemtech Enforcers, just a good discard proc for the Jinx decks, and then he's also a 4 might battler for 2 energy, which is crazy. Obviously, he doesn't get to defend with 4, but still pretty good. Harnessed Dragon has continued to impress me as the game has gone on. At first, I thought this card was really bad, but now that targeting cards at bases is at a premium, there's very few cards that can do it. Harnessed Dragon feels so much better being able to touch the opponent's base, where most cards cannot do that. It's a really strong removal tool. Shout out Victor for continuing to have the best cards in the game. Vanguard Captain is just a really efficient use of energy, especially if you're doing this with a seal. Being able to play this in turn 1 or turn 2, and get access to 2 tokens already is just absolutely nuts. Really strong tempo play. Shout out Victor. I love Warwick so much. I think this card's crazy strong, really, really fun card. I can't wait to see what other synergy Warwick has available to him in the rest of the set. Obviously, right now, there's not a ton of reasons to be playing him, but I think he's already strong enough to run just in Volibear decks alone. His combo with Stormbringer is nuts. It's a guaranteed board clear. And he enters ready, so he can Stormbringer and then come back. Like, he scores the point, clears the board, and then because he's readied and you haven't moved him, right? You've moved him with Stormbringer effect. You can retreat back to base and keep him safe for the following turn. Just a really strong combo. Sigil of the Storm is always overlooked. I think this is one of the better battlefields in the game. It's really strong for Volibear decks because obviously the opponent doesn't want to touch this battlefield. You don't care too much about it, right? You can put something on here early, or you could even ignore it yourself and just kind of contest the other thing. If you're in the Yasuo matchup, which is typically a difficult matchup for you, if you have Sigil of the Storm and they have something like Windswept Hillock or even Reaver's Row, you can kind of set up on that battlefield and say, this is my battlefield, you're not allowed to touch this, and then they more or less have to go over to Sigil of the Storm, and it really puts them behind. It makes it really awkward for them to really play the game, so huge fan of Sigil of the Storm. Altar of Unity is just like a fine battlefield. Obviously, a lot of Victor players run this, but I don't think you have to be a Victor player to run this. It's much worse for you if you run into the Victor player if you're not playing Victor, so be careful with that. But I've run this in my Jinx lineup and it feels relatively good. It's pretty matchup dependent though, I would say. We're going to talk about two legends in this tier. It's going to be Yasuo and Volibear. These two legends do seem pretty comparable to me. I will say that Yasuo would feel substantially worse if the Yasuo champion wasn't as powerful as he was, but his legend ability to like move cards for free it's such like a fundamentally game-altering effect. It's going to be pretty surprising to me if Yasuo is ever bad. Like, what would the rest of the game really need to look like for this effect to be bad? I guess everything could get like energy crept and everything could be like way cheaper than 2 or whatever, but I think realistically speaking, this Yasuo is probably going to be relevant for quite some time. Moving on to S tier, the cream of the crop, the best cards in the game. Starting things off with Yasuo Champion. The ceiling this card has is absolutely nuts. It feels degenerate to lose to. It feels degenerate to play with. In the most recent announcement where they announced the name Riftbound, on the whiteboard in the background, they had Yasuo's effect crossed out along with a post-it note that said, change this. So I think they're going to be changing Yasuo's effect, or at the very least calm Yasuo's effect, because A, the card feels really strong, but I think the real reason you want to change Yasuo is because I think it feels unfair to verse. Even in situations where it's not unfair to verse and you could play around it, it feels unfair to verse. And especially with all of the removal changes, now it's much harder to touch cards that are in the base. Letting Yasuo be a card that can so easily and freely move around, deal some offensive damage, get a point, and then run back to base in such an efficient way, and then gutting a lot of the removal options that we had to deal with something like Yasuo, I think it's only fair that Yasuo takes a pretty dramatic hit here, and I think it's going to result in Yasuo probably getting an entire rework. Not Yasuo the legend or anything like that, just this card. I think they're probably going to rework this card. Last Breath is an extremely powerful signature spell. This is about the power level signature spells should be at. This is a really fun payoff card. It enables a lot of that re-readying movement nonsense that Yasuo players love to do. And I know I just talked about that gameplay pattern being degenerate, but it's really about that Yasuo effect, okay? Last Breath is good, okay? Listen, if you use Last Breath, your signature spell on me, you should be getting a lot of value. And value you do get with this. Stormbringer is just one of the most crazy cards in the game. I love this card so much. I will say, the first time I ever read this card, it took me like 4 times to really understand what was going on here. It didn't help that Epic and Showdown were confusing keywords. Well, I guess Epic's really the confusing keyword if you're not like ultra familiar with the game rules. Focused is fine. But they removed Epic, so you don't have to think about Epic anymore. Don't worry about that. Half the time when I'm playing Volibear, I'm just praying Stormbringers on top of my deck. I love this card so much. It's really, really fun. It's one of the only ways Volley has to kind of rebound the game state. There's a lot of cases where Volibear has to give up the early game to set up his ramp and all of that, and if the opponent walks into a good Stormbringer, that's a great way to swing the game back in your favor. I will say, at high levels of play, this card's going to feel pretty bad. Not bad as in, like, the card is bad, but bad as in, like, it's going to feel bad to play against, because at high levels of play, you should be playing around this card at all times. So the only circumstances where you're going to be getting hit by this card is when you literally couldn't play around it and you just had to gamble. Like, oh, do they have Stormbringer? Do they not have Stormbringer? And in a lot of cases where you're wrong about whether or not they have Stormbringer, they're just going to win. So, you know, that kind of feels bad a little bit, but it's a really fun and exciting swingy card, and I think that's exactly the type of effects you're looking for in this type of game that I think is going to breed a lot of social environment gameplay styles, and a lot of stories will be told with Stormbringer. So yeah, really fun card, really cool card. Speaking of strong cards, Miss Fortune, this card just does everything. It's a efficiently costed card. It's definitely overcosted just on like a stat perspective, but the keywords and the text of this card totally make up for it. It has ganking and acceleration, which is a really, really good start for a card. And then it also has the effect, the first time I move each turn, you can re-ready another card. This is absolutely nuts. It's like a cheaper version of Magma Worm, but it only applies to one card. I love this card so much. It's a really, really powerful effect. This card can create some crazy gameplay states, There's lots of fun puzzles to solve about, you know, how can I move my misfortune in such a way that I can most efficiently deal with this board state and then keep my cards as safe as possible. I love this card because of how powerful it is, but it also, it's not exactly straightforward what you should do with the card when you have it in play. There's a lot of puzzles to solve, and there's a lot to think about when you're controlling this card, and it's an absolute must-remove card from the opponent's perspective too. Challenge is just a really efficient removal. 2-cost removal is really strong. We'll talk about another one of those here shortly. Flame Chomper is not too much exciting to talk about here. It's a really good effect, a really efficient effect. It's the type of thing that Jinx wants to be doing. It's not as flashy as and exciting as the other cards here in S tier, but it definitely belongs here. Vi is a really fun and flashy, exciting card to use. She belongs in Jinx decks, she belongs in Volibear decks because she combos well with the Stormbringer. Just a really fun card. Siphon Power is a crazy powerful signature spell. In a lot of cases where you're pushing against a Victor, you just have to hope that they don't have the Siphon Power or the second copy of Siphon Power or the third copy of Siphon Power, because, man, they go so wide, and this is their payoff for going wide. When you look at the rest of the Victor cards, you're like, okay, we're going wide. What are we doing it for? We're doing it for this card right here. Super powerful effect. It's like a 2-cost Grand Stratagem in a lot of cases. Speaking of which, we'll be talking about Grand Stratagem here shortly. Stupefy. I mean, this is just a really efficient card. -1 might, and you get to draw a card. It's just really good. It doesn't have a power cost associated with it, so as long as you have access to blue in some way, you get to use this. So it's a really flexible -3 cards in your deck type of card. Like, it's gonna be pretty rare that you're building a deck that has access to blue and you don't want to be running 3 copies of Stupefy. It's just, yeah, such an efficient card. Really easy to weave in and out of your curve, and it can make the difference in combat, which is just huge. Seal of Unity is by far and away the best seal in the game. A lot of what Victor wants to be doing involves using power, and you can run an entirely yellow deck with Victor relatively easily, which means running these seals is super enticing. If you run 12 yellow runes and 3 seals, you basically only ever have to recycle once throughout the entirety of the game, which means you're going to be ahead on mana, which means you're going to have, or energy I should say. Definitely best seal in the game right now. Cull the Weak, best removal in game. This card is absolutely nuts. It's really, really strong in the Volibear matchup. It's really strong in the Yasuo matchup. It's definitely significantly weaker in the Mirror matchup, and I'd say it only feels like okay against Jinx, because Jinx goes wide enough that she can usually mitigate this with relative ease, where other decks, well, the other 2 characters I should say, Victor, not Victor, Volibear and Yasuo have a much harder time of trying to mitigate their board against the Cull. Hidden Blade is absolutely degenerate, really, really good setup. Victor already has a lot of board states where they want to just put all of their units on a single battlefield and be like, all right, this is my battlefield, I'm ahead on points because I was able to touch multiple battlefields early on in the game because my boards go so wide. Now I'm just going to stack all my power on one battlefield and say, hey, listen, if you can clear this battlefield, that's great, you win the game, but until then, I've won this game. And if they put a Hidden Blade on that battlefield, it's substantially more difficult to get rid of than otherwise. Essentially, in the Volibear matchup, a lot of times you're putting down a Hidden Blade and essentially you're saying to the opponent, hey, you need to have Stormbringer because it's the only way that you're ever going to get past this Hidden Blade, because you can't just push something onto here and have me kill it with a Hidden Blade, because one of 2 things is going to be true. Either that unit's not going to be big enough that I really care to Hidden Blade it, I can just let you sacrifice it into my board and now I've still got that Hidden Blade, or that unit's going to be big enough that you've given up too much tempo to ever touch the board again. So if a Hidden Blade is set up and they have this big board there and it's super defensive, literally the only way for the Volibear player to get past it is going to be a Stormbringer. And all they had to spend was 1 power on it. And this card already feels that strong. And there's only 1 hidden card. Like, imagine how much stronger Hidden Blade's going to get as if there's just 1 more yellow hidden card. Because now every single time I play that hidden card, you have to assume that I'm running Hidden Blade or that it's Hidden Blade, or else you're just going to lose the game when you push onto my Hidden Blade. It's just like, it's actually nuts how strong Hidden Blade is, by the way. This is probably the best card in the game. Actually, Cull is just so good as well. I don't know. These yellow cards, man, they're just crazy. Grand Stratagem is a Bloodlust, a board buff, whatever you want to call it. +5 might on all friendly units is absolutely crazy. It's game winning. It can be used defensively, offensively. Trifarian War Camp is just really good for Victor decks, and Victor decks are strong, so Trifarian War Camp belongs here. Windswept Hillock is really good for, well, it's really good for Yasuo. It's degenerate for Yasuo. And Reaver's Row is probably the best battlefield in the game, though I will say people should run this less than they do, because it makes your Yasuo matchup worse. And lastly is Victor, the best legend in the game by far. I already thought he was best legend in the game before they gave him -1 cost to his ability. So I definitely think he's best legend in game now. But there you go, that's every single card in Riftbound ranked in tiers from F to S. I'm so excited about the future of this game. I'm so excited to see what the rest of the base set looks like. I'm so excited to see any changes that they've made to what we've seen. Thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.